So I have three challenges. One, I'm following an enormous amount of rich information that's being shared today. Two, I'm the thing between you and a beer. So we'll have a challenge there. And three, I've sort of got quite a lot of things that we can bring about. So what I've tried to do is just put some things into the mix, some of which may confirm what we've heard today and sort of verify that, yes, this is definitely a direction of travel. And a couple of these things may well ask some questions. May ask some questions either of what we're assuming, or it may ask some questions of spaces that we haven't even thought about. So hopefully some of these will resonate in those different ways. What I wanted to do basically was just very quickly just explain a little bit of context as to why, when looking ahead, we need to maybe adopt different approaches going forward than we have in the past. We ran this program 5 years ago, and it's always interesting when people challenge you to say, well, what did you see 5 years ago, and is it coming true? To just share maybe some of the things which people, when we asked them 5 years ago what the world was going to be like in 2020, what they said that related to M2M and IOT, etc. Then share some things that we're hearing right now, because we're 2/3 of the way through 100 workshops in 50 countries in 6 months, so we're asking quite a lot of people what they think, and some of them relate to IoT. And then thirdly, just throw out a couple of points that may be areas where they're not necessarily central to our radar, but they're quite big areas, and maybe they're things that we ought to maybe add into the mix as we go forward. So just a couple of things. Looking ahead, always a challenge. First thing, if anybody asks you, can you predict the future? The answer is no. Nobody can predict the future. If they tell you they can, they're lying. The best we can do is anticipate. We can anticipate sometimes with a high level of confidence, sometimes with a medium level of confidence. But the best we can do is try and understand what might happen if things go a certain way. So that's a context that many organizations are now understanding. And as they do that, lots of them are increasingly recognizing that if they want to look at their sector or their region or their market and look forward, yes, they can ask themselves and they can ask their customers and their ecosystem and their stakeholder what they think, but they probably also need to find out what everybody else thinks is going to happen over the next 10 years as well. Because things are going to be increasingly impacted, and the world of data and digital is just one example, by what happens outside your radar rather than on your radar. And the challenge is, can you bring your internal and the external view together, and hopefully we can be more informed. So that outside in, inside out is what companies, whether it's Shell, whether it's IBM, governments of Singapore, everybody's now trying to take a broader and focused view in that context. So where we fit in is 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Vodafone very kindly asked if we could answer a simple question, which was, how will the mobile phone be used in 10 years' time? Because the way it was being used in 2010 was only probably about half of what the industry thought, and the other half was unexpected. So the way we did that was to create a program where, instead of just talking to the mobile industry, instead of just talking to governments, we went and talked to lots of people. We went and talked to just over 2,500 organizations, 50 workshops, 25 countries, plus online discussion, and engaged and brought all that together to say, well, what is it that you think about the world? No, but we didn't ask anybody what they thought about mobile. We asked them what they thought about the world over the next 10 years. And then when we got all that, we could then filter off and say, so what does this mean for mobile? So whether it's healthcare, whether it's finance, or lots of different perspectives. So out of that, 5 years ago, about 50 things came to the surface as big things. Big things that were going to be areas of difference, big things that maybe could impact multiple sectors, but also big things that people were already starting to put serious effort behind, whether that's political effort, financial effort, or people. They were things that people were really sort of building on. So I just thought I'd just share a couple of those from last time, because it sort of helps us set the context as we go forward now. So the first thing everybody was saying, bear in mind this is 2010, asking about 2020, everybody was saying we'll all be connected by 2020. So everywhere on the planet we'll be able to get a connection. Might not be a very good connection, but we will be connected as a fundamental basis. The other thing, and obviously we're talking to the likes of Google in all this, but also we talk to school children and we talk to presidents and prime ministers and everybody in between. There's a general view that by 5 years from now, we'll probably have most of our information digitized. And depending where we are and who we are, we'll be able to access that information and start to do clever things with it. 5 years ago, people were just starting to talk about dynamic pricing as the basis of lots of business models. The idea of varying pricing real time was something that the energy sector was getting really excited about for using smart meters and as to whether or not we could control demand. Equally, travel companies, you see it now in Delhi, you see it in Japan with real-time pricing of train prices and being relayed back to your mobile so that a more optimized transport system can exist. But the principle of dynamic pricing, which often you tend to think of negatively in the way that that airline ticket seems to have got more expensive in the past 5 minutes than it was when I looked at it 5 minutes ago, or in the way that if you're buying a product off a certain online marketplace, you may get charged more if you use a Mac than if you use a PC. So we see the negatives, but actually there's lots of positives and lots of people very enthusiastic about how dynamic pricing can play out. One thing that was just starting to appear was whether people would recognize their digital shadow was an issue. Whether people would start to realize that their data is being used and could be used in different ways. And to a certain context, how that data would intrude on things like privacy, but also allow the creation of value. Just starting to have those conversations. Then a couple of other things, predictive analysis, lots of people getting very excited about the potential that that could have. And clearly the whole idea of smart buildings, intelligent buildings, more efficiency, the self-aware building was one of the big things. So from my perspective, you sort of look back 5 years and most of those do seem to be at various contexts in action. Some of them were halfway towards the vision, some of them were a little bit more. But they all seem to be heading in the right direction. And since then, lots of other people have started jumping into the space, and the whole, whether it was M2M, IOT, smart cities, everything seems to be becoming smarter and more connected, and lots of people are sort of doing interesting stuff. And one of the ones which clearly has excited a lot of people is all around smart cities. And we've had, primarily with association with some big companies, had some big pushes in the advancement there. But people are getting excited, but also are asking questions. So they're getting excited with what Intel have done in San Jose and sort of overlaying intelligence onto the existing infrastructure. They're getting excited about what Cisco is doing in Songdo in terms of starting from scratch and building a whole new city that is trying to be one of the world's most connected cities. But at the same time, other people are starting to say, are we actually trying to build smart cities, or are we trying to create smarter citizens? Is this actually about the people? Is this about putting in place the information and the infrastructure and the M2M connectivity that then allows you and me to choose whether I catch this train or the next train, whether I behave in a certain way or another way, and therefore I can see the impacts. So it's interesting as we talk to lots of people leading smart cities programs around the world, some are very much pushing the technology and others are saying, this is about social change, and this is about something to do that we need to connect with the culture as well as push the technology. And we often find that when you look for examples of where stuff has really worked, and people often give the example of mobile payments in Africa and M-Pesa, that when stuff really has big impact, you've got the technology, but it's accessible and affordable. You've got a social need, but also at the same time, you've probably got a positive regulatory environment, and you've also got an organization or a network acting as the catalyst for change. And you need all four of those things together before you start to see really big, exciting things. So that was sort of the past few years. Now we're, as I said, 2/3 of the way through what is a completely crazy thing to do. But we're running 100 workshops in 50 countries in 6 months. Last time Vodafone was the only host. This time we have 35 hosts. We have big companies, MasterCard, Nokia, Intercontinental. We have governments. We have lots of universities all around the world have joined in to say, actually, we want to be part of this. If this is about us all putting in what we think so that we can all access the output and we can all take it away, then wouldn't it be better if there's more of us involved and more of us sharing things? And so the team are currently in Brisbane doing a workshop yesterday on the future of energy, tomorrow the future of food. There's events, actually there's two that might be interesting to you. There's a future of connected cars in Munich at the end of July, and then there's future of internet security in Berlin in August. So lots and lots of conversations happening to try and listen to all those different perspectives. And again, share it back so that everybody has access to all this information. So what are they saying that's different than they said 5 years ago? Well, one thing they're not saying that's different is that everything will be connected. The same thing, yep, we're heading in that direction. Everyone's sort of still agreeing that we will have the capability that not only everyone, but everything can be connected to the network. And underlying that, we've probably got more intelligent networks. We've got self-aware, self-adapting networks going on and connecting all this stuff. So the fundamental technology pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are still there, and everyone's still using the same 50 billion number that Cisco used and Ericsson used. Everyone's saying you have 50 billion SIM cards, 1 trillion connected devices. So everyone's sort of still on course for that. But what else are they saying about how M2M is going to develop and how data could change? One thing, and this actually came from the Chief Privacy Officer of Vodafone in his initial perspective, saying, bear in mind, we're going to know stuff that we never planned to know. We're going to know so much stuff about so many things that we could be completely overwhelmed. And so one of our biggest challenges is going to be making sense of all the information, not necessarily just finding it. And whether that information that we increasingly are all available to access starts to bring up ethical challenges as well as practical challenges. So this sort of sheer tsunami of data that's heading our way could itself be positive, but also prove a challenge in certain contexts. As we've talked around the world, people have started to challenge some of the assumptions that we're making. We had a really interesting conversation in Washington right at the beginning of the program, and there was a couple of government people, a couple of companies from the types of companies you'd expect to be at a big event in Washington. Part of the problem with this project is it's all anonymous, so I can't say who said what, but big companies talking about data and saying, you know, we're making a big assumption that anonymized data is going to stay anonymized. We're currently taking data and we're aggregating it and we're selling it, and we're not necessarily recognizing that the technology may well come in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years that allows people to take that data and take it back to where it came from and find the source. So one of the challenges as we increasingly create business models that rely on sharing each other's data that we hope has become anonymous is how anonymous does it really need to be, and how anonymous will it be? So there's a real interesting pushback, largely from a legal side, but also from a technology side, that maybe we need to think a little bit more about that. Another thing that was brought up is that there's lots of companies, and particularly countries at the moment, who are trying to put some sort of their arms around data, whether it's Russia trying to persuade everybody to leave all their consumer data on servers in Russia rather than necessarily elsewhere, or whether it's things that are going on in Asia. There's people who are trying to say, let's control data. And lots of people have pushed back and said, well, forget that. Data doesn't recognize national boundaries. If this is the edge of one country and that's the start of the next country, data is not going to stop. It's like water. It'll just flow to the area of least resistance. So when we try and think of things locally or regionally or at a European level, we ought to recognize that we've got to work on the assumption that data is going to flow globally, and we've got to design our systems and our businesses within that context. It's come up several times. People are increasingly excited by the value of data. There's almost like a land grab with everybody trying to own as much data and get access to as much data as possible. And this seems to be driving lots of positive things in terms of the creation and the sharing of the data, but also some people are starting to say, are we trying to grab too much data? Are we going to find that we've got a liability at the end of the day that we've got data that we didn't want, and that now other people are starting to say, actually, that's dangerous from a business perspective. That's too risky. So everybody's on the let's get data and more of it, and we can make more of it. But people are also ethically starting to push back and saying, do we really want all that? Particularly around things like healthcare and stuff like that. Now, one of the interesting things that for me has come up time and time again, but where it came up first was quite an interesting perspective, was the idea of a data marketplace. The fact that if data has value, it is being traded already. It's going to be traded and resold and resold. It won't just be sold once, it'll be sold twice, 3 times, 4 times. And each time it's probably going to increase or decrease in value. So one of the places that this came up was Dubai. And Dubai isn't necessarily technologically ahead of the game, but what it is very good at doing is saying, there's a big space, we need to be part of it. So Dubai is planning to launch a data marketplace. It doesn't know how it's going to work. It doesn't know what the protocols are going to be. It doesn't know how the ecosystem is going to develop. But everybody seems to be saying, yep, we're going to need those. We're going to need data marketplaces, just like we have stock exchanges. So what's the model going to be, and how's it going to work? Because if we as businesses or as individuals are going to be buying and selling each other's data, how do we actually make that happen is one of the things which quite a few people are starting to say, yep, we need that. And I was in India, arrived from India yesterday, and again, in Mumbai, the conversations with some of the technology companies were, data marketplaces, we need to be there, we need to be on the front foot, because that's going to be how this whole thing shakes out. It's not just going to be standards, it's going to be about the means by which we can buy and sell stuff. In terms of applications, huge expectation, and I know we had some of the Philips perspectives earlier today, huge expectations that if we use data and M2M and IOT, we can start to really improve efficiency. And one of the main areas that people are looking at is energy. Clearly, more people on the planet using more and more energy, most of which is going to be fossil fuels for the next 20, 30 years, because it'll take 50 years before we can really switch. The big short-term thing for the next 5, 10 years has to be about how can we help the system use less energy. So whether it's 50% of the amount of energy or 70% of the amount of energy, we've got to be more efficient. So there's lots of huge excitement about the industrial systems that can go into place there, but also lots of anticipation about how we can start to use the information that we're getting to help people make better decisions about how much energy they're using. So that perspective of, will we have smarter consumers again? Will we have smarter citizens rather than just everything looking after itself coming back into play? Flipping into another area, we've had quite a few conversations around the future of work. There was a conversation earlier about artificial intelligence. There's this perspective of, is technology and all these connected machines and connected robots, is that going to be a net positive for us? Or is it going to start to take away some of the jobs? Is it going to start to undermine some of the things we do? And lots of people tend to look at photos like this as their idea of where technology is replacing human activity and effectively creating value, but in a different way. Lots of people saying, well, we're going to be using more and more robots, particularly in things like mining and stuff like that, where it's dangerous to put people, so that's great, let's put the robots in other places. But other people, and this was quite an interesting pushback, saying actually the technology is going to go where the money is. And where the money is probably where the accountants are and the lawyers are. So the jobs that are really worth replacing in the future are probably lawyers and accountants, because we don't need most of them. Most of them can be replaced by a clever bit of software, hopefully acting ethically, and maybe more ethically than the real people, you never know. But lots of the big companies in the IT sector we've talked to, as well as governments, are saying technology isn't necessarily going to replace the low-end jobs. It's going to replace the high-end, expensive jobs that can be performed better. That are generally several quite switched-on clever people and then 100 people in the back office doing all the processing. So let's replace those dull jobs with more interesting, opportunities for those people, but let's put a bit more technology in there. And clearly a lot of this is relying on M2M information and IoT coming through. And therefore, we create a global elite. We create increasingly those people who are at the top, those who ride above everything else, and those people who are global nomads, whose main concern is not tax systems or employers, but is where interesting people are and interesting projects are. So we're increasingly in a situation where skills that we're going to need to tap are ever mobile, and they're going to new cities. They're not going to London and New York and Tokyo. They're going to Santiago or Lagos or they're going to places that 20 years ago nobody even thought about. And those places are attracting people in new ways, and a lot of that is about the innovation clusters that are taking place that are pulling people into those areas. I mentioned privacy earlier as one of the things which was just starting to go 5 years ago. It's so big now. We were at an event with 50,000 privacy professionals. I didn't think there were 50,000 privacy professionals, but there were 50,000 of them. There were lawyers, there were security people, ex-MI5, policemen, you name it. They're all jumping into the security, into the privacy space. And the big question that's coming out of that is this really a global issue? Or is this a very Western government, big company thing? Will real people on the street care about their own privacy in 5 years' time? And in certain countries, will anybody get the opportunity to think about privacy? So privacy is increasingly being brought up as an issue. It's the sort of thing that governments pull in big companies and start beating them up about. But also lots of people are sort of saying, well, it's going to be different in different places. We were in Singapore 2 or 3 weeks ago, and there was a lovely example there of total trust in the government. There was a conversation about how M2M and data could help in the healthcare space. And somebody volunteered and said, well, it's clearly the Singapore government can effectively give every 5-year-old child a Fitbit or whatever the next generation Fitbit is, and they can wear it all the time, and we can monitor their health, and if there's any problem with their health, then the government immediately knows, and we can start to put in place the necessary support. And sort of, you take a step back and think, so you're going to track every child's complete medical data all the time? And everyone was saying, well, yeah, Singapore, we trust the government, they'll do the right things. You try taking that idea into the States, never mind into several other countries, and you'll get complete rejection of invasion of personal rights. So it's interesting as to what one country's or one culture's view is of the same issue varies as you go around the place. But privacy is definitely bubbling up, but lots of people are getting confused about what they actually mean. And do they mean data ownership? Do they mean invasion of privacy? Or do they just mean people being aware of what they're doing? Definitely coming up, we've had it in conversations in Shanghai, we've had it in conversations in London, we've had it in conversations in South Africa. Big problem of the Internet of Things is we're going to enable more and more cyber terrorism. When we were talking to the sort of government security, CIA, MI5 types, pretty certain that an airline will be brought down sometime in the next 5 years by hacking. Pretty certain that we're going to have really big problems about utilities being controlled by other countries and stuff like that. And a real pushback saying, actually, if those happen, and those happen big, they could really slow down the adoption of M2M. Because we're in one way, we're hoping that the government do their job and protect everything, but in another way, we're putting in place a system that allows other people to cause significant challenge. So there's no right answers about this, and there's lots of, whether it's allegedly the Chinese hacking the American employment records, whether it's Sony getting hacked, there's lots of examples of things going on. From what we understand from the conversations, there was at least 20,000 cyber attacks denied by the security services in Europe last year. So one of the things that sort of is there, and we often don't talk about it because we hope that somebody else's problem. But there is a reality that if something did go big and did cause a challenge, we could all face a problem and have a whole rug pulled from under us, because society may react back. So I'm not trying to depress you before you go and have a beer, but there is a reality there that this is the sort of thing that other people are talking about your space. They're saying it's great, it's fantastic, more efficiency, more and more opportunities, but at the same time, we could be regretting how quickly we're going into some of these spaces without necessarily thinking about the consequences too much. Positively, people are quite confident that certainly in the upper middle class Western world, probably not on the streets of a village, one of the 700,000 villages in India, but in our world, we'll probably be curating our own data. We'll be deciding what to share with people and what not to share. What information from our machines, from our possessions, from all our connected devices goes through those data marketplaces and is shared or is kept back. We may not even do it ourselves. We may well have an app that does it because it's all done automatically and technology solves the problem. Or all those unemployed lawyers and accountants may become privacy brokers, and they may be the people who actually trade your personal data and sell it and look after it, etc. Who knows? But the reality is that we're probably in a situation where we will be more aware of what our information is being used for, whether it's our information, our car's information, our dog's information, or anything. But there will be an increasing awareness of how to use all that. And at the same time, we're going to get better and better and better at using public data. You know, London, the reason why there's a picture of London there is it's the most open public data set on the planet, just over 1,000 sets of data currently available and shared, which is a great opportunity, because if we can overlay public data with the private data, we can really start to do lots of clever stuff. However, people are also raising a couple of questions and saying this is great. There's lots of social benefits we can do about making the transport system more efficient. There's lots of things that we can do about making it so that we can have more fun, or that our online delivery arrives on time, and et cetera, et cetera. But maybe there's some big issues out there that other people are worried about that maybe the M2M world also ought to be thinking about. Because there's some really big stuff that probably could do with the talents in this room at a really significant level. So just 3 quick ones. One, pretty much everywhere on the planet, there's concern about the gap between rich and poor. Whether it's Europe, where we tend to sort of jump onto lots of concerns about what's happening in Greece, what's happening in Spain with the increasing gaps, whether it's South America, whether it's India, we are all getting richer and leaving lots of people behind. And at some point, that's going to cause real problems. But when you say to people, what can we do about it, they don't say, well, let's take the money from the rich and give it to the poor. Let's come up with some uber socialist system that reallocates money. What they say is, let's use technology to help reduce the gap. Let's make sure everybody's connected. Let's make sure that the digital divide that everybody talks about isn't as bad as it really is. And let's improve healthcare. Let's improve education, particularly female education. And let's use M2M and mobile to actually solve the problems that cause this as a consequence. Because that's where, if we're going to really do good stuff, that's where we could really have a big impact. Another area that people are pushing back on and saying, this smart city stuff, it's great, but we're all moving to cities, most of them on the coast, and none of them are designed to float. We're going to have 4 degrees of climate change, which is round about a metre extra of water. Can we use data in M2M to help us create the systems to warn, create the systems to manage, and create the systems that are going to help us address these things? Because if you're under 4 meters of water, you're sort of, everything else is slightly inconsequential. So what can we do about trying to, we know cities are going to flood, but how can we start to put together the pieces that really start to bring that together? And just as two quick examples of that, with apologies to people from the 2 cities I'm going to name, but New York's no longer insured. We were talking to insurance companies about what the consequences of Hurricane Sandy, and they pulled the insurance. That sort of reinsurance system, that's the safety net that underpins, that's been pulled. So that's why the Mayor of New York is trying to raise a $20 billion fund so that New York is self-insured. And what's New York doing? It's rebuilding itself exactly as it was, not how it maybe could be in the future. So we're in a situation where governments and big insurance companies are starting to take a step back. Just like they're saying, fat people or people who smoke, we won't insure you. They're starting to say, certain cities, we're not going to insure you. And as an example from Canada, Calgary, which isn't even on the coast, right in the middle, was flooded 2012, 2013, and the local government there turned around to, not everybody, but turned around to a whole number of people and said, sorry, your houses are in the wrong place. Partly our fault, partly your fault, but your house is in the wrong place. So here's a one-off payment. I don't know whether it was $100,000 or $200,000 or something which said, here it is, it's one-off. You can use it to rebuild your house, repair it, or you can move. But we're not going to come back again because your house is in the wrong place and you're just going to get continue flooded. And the same thing is happening in Australia, the same thing is happening in lots of places. That because we haven't got the clever intelligence in place, because we've made some daft decisions, the governments are making the risk analysis and are starting to pull the rug from under. And then the last one, and it was touched on by Michael in his previous comment, that with 3 minutes to beer, we'll hit that exactly. We've got another couple of billion people going to land on the planet over the next 20, 30 years. Lots of people are really worried about how we're going to feed them. Have we got enough land? Is that land being used for the right stuff? Are we going to have enough pigs? Are we going to have enough cows? I didn't realise there was more pigs on the planet than there were chickens, which I found really weird, because I thought half the planet didn't eat pigs. But anyway, are we going to somehow manage to create all this new food resources for these next billion or 2 billion people? Or is there another way? And the other way is that every day we throw away a third of our food. In Europe, it's around about 30, 40%. In some countries, it's 50%. In India, it's down to about 4 or 5%. But generally, as a world average, we throw away a third of our food, largely because we like choice, excessive choice, largely because we somehow believe sell-by date messages are important, and largely because we just are incredibly inefficient about the way we supply food, use it, and then most importantly, consume it. And when we were in Singapore, there was a lovely conversation with one of the big hotels that said, you know, here, somebody says they're having a wedding, we say, okay, how many people? They say 1,000. So we think, we better cater for 1,100. In Singapore, the concept of RSVP doesn't stack up. If somebody says they're coming, they're not. You don't know, really. So only 500 people actually come to the wedding. So the hotel throws away 600 people's food. And because it's Singapore and you're not allowed to use food twice, it all gets thrown away. So the question that came out of the conversations on the future of food, not just in Singapore, but in Australia, in Thailand, was, can't the technology help us? Isn't there something out there that can help us better manage this? Because this is probably, next to water, the biggest problem we've got on the planet, and yet it's so simple. We just need to use less. And hopefully, not necessarily use less in terms of don't eat so much, which is a separate problem, but let's not throw so much of it away. So they're just, I know they're a little bit hard-hitting ones, but they're the sort of things that other people are saying, and these are big things, can you help? And my question to you will be, I'm sure you can, because I'm sure all the clever people in this room and all the clever stuff that you've got going can solve this problem really well. And if you need numbers of people, 8 billion people on the planet need this help. So it's probably a good business model to get into. So that was what I just wanted to share. Last things really, which I didn't mention at the beginning, everything that we get, every conversation, every insight is there for you to use. Everything is on the web, on the Future Agenda website, on Flickr. It's all there, and it's all being, as I said, shared, it's anonymized, but it's shared, and you're very free to use that in any way you want to. Second thing, just to reiterate, there are still another 30 events to take place, quite a few of them in Europe, the one I mentioned in Berlin, the one I mentioned in Munich. If you want to join in, just let us know, because you'd be very welcome. And thirdly, I know there's a few negative things in there, but hopefully some of that challenges some thoughts, but hopefully at the same time a lot of it confirms what you're already planning, and that actually we're doing the right thing. We just need to tweak a little bit around the edges. So thank you very much, and enjoy the beers.